Welcome, everyone. We will begin the webinar on estimating refinishing, what you are leaving on the table. This is part 2 of a 3-part series. I'm Melissa Jolls with RDA Impact. Scott Ellegood, founding partner and chief operating officer of Accountable Estimating, is your presenter today. The presentation will take approximately 35 to 40 minutes, and we are recording it and we'll post it on our YouTube channel. If you have questions during the webinar, you can type them in the chat box at the bottom right of your screen, and Scott will answer them during the presentation. Now, I'll turn it over to Scott.
Thank you, Melissa. And let me say this about questions, everybody. Sometimes you may feel like you don't want to ask a question because you may think it's stupid or not relevant. Please ask it, because odds are everybody else is thinking the same thing. And there's no dumb questions, because it's increasing your knowledge and your skill set. So please feel free to ask those questions. So today we're going to talk about estimating refinishing and what you're leaving on the table. So we're going to look at the refinishing hours, how those are bid, and where you can increase your knowledge and where you can find what you're leaving that your actual technicians are doing in the back, but you're not successfully bidding on the estimate. So I introduced myself on the first webinar, and I won't bore you with repeating everything on the screen. I will say that even though I have a university degree, I'm a tradesman. I started in the body shop. I have been taking things apart and trying to figure out how they work since as long as I can remember, and now I do that with estimating, with my partners at Accountable Estimating. Many issues with estimating that all shops face boils down to communication and understanding. Understanding the rules, and most importantly, understanding how the process works in the marketplace. By the way, there are no magic pills for estimating success. It's just hard work and planning. So let's talk about our objectives we'll cover in the call today. Our first one is, I want everybody to have a greater understanding of the labor rate charge for refinishing. Secondly, what it really means when you reduce refinish time. What work actually goes into tinting, how paint products play a vital role in vehicle safety, and documenting the refinishing process. So I first want to say this and add a disclaimer. Accountable Estimating is not attempting to assert any labor rate charge for any repair labor operation. The following is for an illustrative purpose only. So let's break down the refinish labor rate charge. We'll just start with some basic math. Since we write estimates in tenth of hours, then it's logical to understand how much a tenth of an hour costs when you are selling collision repair. If we assume an hourly refinish rate of $50 an hour, then all we need to do is multiply that by 1/10 to get $5 for every tenth. So let me ask everybody, are you going to step over $5 if it's laying on your shop floor? I think more that's a rhetorical question. I don't think anybody would step over $1. But there's more to it in refinishing. We need to add the material charge to that, because most shops use a paint material labor rate multiplier based on the refinish labor hours. If we assume a paint and material rate of $34 an hour, then we get $3.40 using the same formula. Now let's add that together with the $5 finish rate charge, and we get $8.40. So think of it this way: every time you miss a tenth of an hour for a refinish charge, take your rates and replace that 34, replace that 50 with your rates, and that's what it's costing you every time you miss it. Now let's look at how the refinish labor times are determined. Excuse me. We should always start with an understanding of how our estimating system calculates refinish times. Each of the big 3 estimating database providers have a different amount of information on how they arrived at published book times for refinish labor. Let's start with Autotex. This is an excerpt from the Refinish Guidelines section 4-4 in the Autotex database reference manual for cars and light trucks. And it reads, this section reflects the up-to-date findings of our data collection from a cross-section of repair facilities across North America, as well as our conclusions and recommendations on the most significant areas in the refinishing process. It is not our intention to suggest that observations, conclusions, or recommendations apply with 100% accuracy to every refinish situation, but rather that Autotext reflects the findings of our comprehensive study coupled with ongoing efforts. That's a lot of words. And them saying that they're using the information in the industry to help determine, well, they're using that information and historical data of previous years to help determine these labor rate times. And they're not 100%. So let me just put this out there for thought. If you were asked to reduce the refinish rate time based on statements similar to this, could you not ask to increase one? So that works both ways. I'm not asking you to increase those. Generally, where you see an increasing of a refinish labor rate is when you have some kind of custom application. And that's also another reason why you can't say these times are bid with 100% accuracy. But remember, these are bid and accepted book times in our industry, both by the collision repairers and the insurance companies that pay for those repairs. So now let's take a look at what Mitchell has. In the Mitchell CEG, the Collision Estimating Guide, under section 28 for refinish procedures and refinish general information, we find their information or their explanation of refinish book time. An excerpt from that guide reads, refinish times in this guide pertaining to new undamaged parts. I want to stop there a minute. New undamaged parts. So what we're doing with this in Autotext, Mitchell, and CCC One is we're setting the plumb line, or if you're a frame technician, the datum line, that 0-point calibration. Where am I starting from with the refinish labor time? Well, refinish labor times are for new undamaged parts. And if you'll read other labor time premises, just as an added benefit to this, you'll find, say, a remove and replace of a fender is based on the same thing. They're not damaging fenders and seeing what it takes to take them on and off. They're starting from the position of this is what it takes to R&I or refinish from a new undamaged part. Mitchell goes on to explain more detail with the categories you see bulleted here. Now in CCC's Motor Guide to Estimating, under the heading of Refinish Time Premise, this is the opening paragraph. It contains a lot of good information that allows each estimator to understand where the labor times are starting from. All of the guides communicate their plumb line or their starting point. Accessing your estimating system's P pages daily is the first step in taking control of your estimating operation. Estimators should know their toolbox as skillfully as your technicians do. And the P pages is one of the most important tools in that toolbox. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. My PowerPoint froze on me for a minute. Here we go. So this is a chart from the CCC One Motor Guide, and it breaks down each refinish labor by task. So what you're seeing here in this pie chart is one labor hour as we break down into it. And what I am showing here, the 7, the 6, and the 6% in the upper left of the chart is for the color coat application. Only 19% of each refinish hour, or 2/10 of each refinish hour, is for the base coat application. That means 81% of the refinish hour are processes that are performed on every panel, regardless of how refinishing is bid on the estimate. That includes blending, where clear coat will be applied over the entire panel. The entire surface must be sanded or scuffed, so the clear coat will have something to mechanically bond to. So think about this for a moment. If only 19% is to apply the color coat, and that comes down to approximately 2/10 per hour, how much are you refinishing? So let's look back at what we discussed before as far as the breakdown of labor calibrations. So if 1/10 of refinish hour equals $5 and 1/10 of paint material equaled $3.40 in our illustration, that gives us $8.40 for every tenth. So the 19%, or roughly 2/10 of every refinish hour, is allocated for the spraying of the color coat. So if we multiply that for that refinish hour, that is $16.80. That is the labor, paint, and material cost for spraying the base coat per that hour. How much have you been reducing your refinish hours? That should scare some people, because the estimates that we see over and over again from across the nation, people will a lot of times just take the blend time and say, okay, I'll reduce it that much. That's obviously way too much. You're actually paying the bill payer back for painting the car in some instances, and you are not likely covering the cost of your material. So I want to ask you this. If you're having trouble paying for the material you have, or it's a very tight calculation for you, how am I going to pay for all this material we're using? It may not be the cost of the material per se. It may be how you're billing for it and how you're capturing for it. And that's something we help people do every day. So I want to give you a little bit of an estimating tip. If you're not familiar with the database enhancement gateway, their web address is at the top middle of the screen in blue. Write that down, degweb.org. You can go to the DEG. You can look at all 3 systems P pages just in a few clicks. There is also tons of articles, job aids, like the one in front of you, that helps you compare across the databases. Because I know a lot of shops rekey estimates based on what the appraiser for the independent appraisal company or the insurance company came into your shop with, so you can understand it within your shop. And they have a lot of tools that can help you understand that. Also, they have a very important tool. If you have a situation where a guide is incorrect, or you feel it's incorrect, or you have questions around something, they have a way that you can submit to them any kind of corrections or questions. And if they find something that's incorrect, let's say a quarter panel that's bid to R&I for 2 hours, and it probably should be a whole lot more, like 20, you submit that and they will get that corrected through the estimating system. After all, everybody who's creating the systems and everything that we work are all human, and mistakes happen. But degweb.org is a very important tool in that estimator toolkit. Now let's talk about what goes into tinting paint. This is a charge similar to corrosion protection, where estimators seem to always look for a cookie cutter approach to estimating. They always put the same time on everything, and that is not a good way to estimate this. We find through our training and our research that this is usually due to a lack of knowledge in the estimator skill set. So we need training for the estimator for them to understand it better. You want to understand the why behind you're doing what you're doing. Typically, they do this typically because they've never experienced tinting automotive paint. I can tell you, as a retired refinish technician, I can assure you this is a whole lot more involved than it is tinting, say, the color for your living room that you do at Home Depot or somewhere like that. While the idea and the physics are the same, and the principles are the same as far as achieving a specific color, there are many other reasons why you're tinting automotive paint. And the expectation of that tint being more accurate is a whole lot more high than it is in your living room compared to your kitchen. So when do you bid tint, and what do you know what work goes into the color? To accurately and thoroughly bid tinting, the estimator should understand the technical process involved in the repair of the vehicle. So what is happening in this? Is this a bumper cover and a fender and a hood? Are we blending the hood? Are we blending the door? So what are the processes involved? You identify that daily. It's really nothing new, but it's taking it into your mindset and thinking, okay, what needs to be done if the tint happens for this paint? You want to use that understanding coupled with the research to bid appropriate times. And your research can be OEM procedures. It can be paint manufacturer procedures. You know, if it is a flexible panel, like a plastic panel, what does your paint manufacturer say it needs to happen for that to be flexible with the paint product that you produce? So there is research involved in that. And also use that understanding coupled with the research to document the repair file with the appropriate documentation. So bidding on your estimate is the first step once you understand it. Then you want to take that information that you gathered and make sure it's in the repair file, because you're going to use that information to justify that charge if the insurance company or bill payer asks for it. And two, you're going to use that information to edify the customer and the shop in the future. How do you know 3 months from now why you did what you did and the reasons for it? Remember when I said there's no magic pill to this? Our industry has a lot of catching up to do in regards to estimating. Our estimators need a lot of training, but don't just use anything labeled estimating training. Talk to the company, ours included, to understand what you are buying so you can ensure your estimators are gaining a skill set that your shop will prosper from. So let's talk about the tinting that goes into two-stage paints. So a little bit about two-stage paint is they're really self-descriptive, right? The first stage is your base coat or your color coat. The second stage is your clear coat. And also, depending on the color and or the paint manufacturer, it may be necessary to tint a primer sealer prior to applying the base coat, or even use a primer sealer of a certain color prior to using the base coat for that specific paint. You know, red is not red from one manufacturer to another, whether it be the manufacturer of the car or the manufacturer of the paint. There are so many variables that goes into refinishing. This is why we cannot develop or have a cookie cutter approach to it, because it is really specialized. And as estimators, this is where your skill set comes in. The more you understand why behind something and how it is done, the better you can bid it, the better you can justify it, document it, and get paid for it. Also, two-stage paints may or may not require a test spray out panel. It just really depends on the color. But the bottom line is this: tinting is a judgment time call, and applying a cookie cutter time is simply not accurate estimating. So let's talk about the steps involved. What's the refinish technician doing when they're tinting that color? Before I go into the steps, I do want to say this. This is a paint mix that is separate from the color that will be applied to the repair. Sometimes it's easy to think that I'm tinting the color and they're mixing the color and they're just going to tint what they're going to spray. No, they need to tint something separate from that setup that is described in the P pages for the refinish hours that you have bid. Your paint manufacturer will have recommendations to this, saying it takes a minimum of so many ounces to tint a color and achieve a tintable color match. So the first thing you have to do is obtain the color information and paint chips. And depending on your operation and how it works, you know, you may have estimators obtaining the color information and then a refinish technician grabbing the chips and testing those. In most of the databases, that will be within the actual refinish charge, but always check and see and read your P pages to make sure that's within the charge. They're going to use a paint can. Now, this may seem a little petty, but I guarantee you the jobbers and the owners don't think this is petty. That paint can may only be a pint can, but I guarantee you it costs more than 10 cents. And every time they go to tint paint, they're going to use a can, they're going to use a label, which requires a printer and ink, and they're going to create a separate can and label as to what will actually be mixed for the car. Now, if you tint almost every car or a majority of cars that comes in your shop, and let's say you do 100 or 50 or 150 cars a week or month, whatever that is, and you're tinting most of them, that's a lot of paint cans and a lot of labels. So think about what actually happens. What are the logical steps that it takes to do these things? Because this is what derives your business decision to bid something. Also, a minimum mix. I mentioned that before. I know that with some paint manufacturers, it's usually no less than 4 ounces, simply because you need to have enough material that you can actually make something with. Also, additional toners and binders to mix that 4 ounces. Now, when when you're mixing the colors are just not always colors. They may actually have to choose something outside of the formula. For instance, if a formula, say, is red and it has 6 different toners mixed into it, in order to achieve a color match, the refinish technician may need to choose a 7th toner in order to get that color match at that point. So you may not be able to know that in the beginning, but I want you to use that in your calculations when you're thinking about this, because it's not as simple as dumping some paint, putting a little black and white to make it darker or lighter. It really is a very, I can say this from experience, it was a frustrating skill set to try to master. Mixing and tinting paint is really something. If you have people that do that well, you have some special people that really understand that, and their skill set is enormous. So they may also need to produce a test spray out panel. Now that depends on whether it is a multi-stage beyond 2, or if the color is just way off and they need to spray it out and basically create their own chips. So in order to do that spray out panel, that may require a sealer layer, depending on the color, like on the previous slide, and the paint manufacturer's recommendations on that. It'll require a base coat layer or base coat layers and clear coat layer. So 3-stage paints. This is really a whole other animal, because when we're adding this other variant of a mid coat, so we have base, mid, and clear coat. When we're adding that variant, it exponentially creates the amount of different colors we can create with that. So this is the color that may reflect the match, how well the base coat and mid coats layers are added, and may require also either special color primer sealer before, or a tint to a primer sealer before. Again, that's your paint manufacturer's guidelines and what needs to happen with a specific color. It may require tinting of the base coat and the mid coat. So most of the time, from my experience years ago, and also asking refinish technicians and owners and shop managers today, most of the time people are tinting just the base coat when they're doing this and achieving this. Or they're just tinting maybe the mid coat. But you need to ask the question, in order to achieve a match, a color match, do I need to tint both the base and the mid? This is a situation where, as a shop, you need to decide, at this stage, I want the estimator to bring this to the technician and ask them. Or maybe it's a managerial decision that you bring it to the manager. But what I'm really wanting to point out and get across here is this is a point of a question. There's a fork in the road here. What do I do? Because if they're going to have to tint both, and maybe it's a supplement item, then you want to document that, because now we have 2 cans, 2 labels, 2 different sets of toners and binders that we're putting together to create these coats. So 1 or more. Again, this is why we do not need cookie cutter times. And depending on the color and paint manufacturer, it may require tinting of the primer sealer again. A test spray out panel is needed every time with a 3-stage or above paint, because of the variables I talked about. The variable of that mid coat really makes a huge difference. The reason why the spray out panel is required every time is because the painter needs to determine how many layers of base coat is needed to obtain a sufficient coverage, in conjunction with how many mid coat layers is needed for a color match. So you may see the refinish technician put 3 coats of base coat down, and then some 2-inch tape after it flashes, and then another coat, 2-inch tape, another coat. That way they have 2, 3, 4, 5, and then they'll come back with a mid coat, and they may do something similar. So when they look at it after they clear it, they can go, all right, in order to achieve a color match here, I need 4 layers of base coat and 3 layers of mid coat to get this. So that is the reason why they need to do that every time. Do not assume that the test spray out panel is covered in the cost of tinting. You know, in the previous slides, I showed you what goes into the tinting. If you're doing both in one charge, I'm going to ask you to stop doing that, bid them separately, and use the language in the guide. For instance, test spray out panel is the exact language in the CCC One Motor Guide to Estimating. This way, when somebody who doesn't have the experience you do, or a technical experience as a technician, reviews that potentially for payment and what they're doing, they can go to the motor guide and look at that and see, oh, okay, that's not included operation. But if you name it something, say like letdown panel, that's what we always called it, they're not going to have any idea what that is, and you're likely not to get paid for it. So let's step through some basic steps on creating a test spray out panel for two-stage paint. So they may have to apply the primer sealer before the base coat. They'll have to apply the base coat in layers like I was describing a lot of times with the three-stage. They may put 3 coats down, tape it off, 4, tape it off, 5, 6. That way they can see how many coats it's going to take to get that blendable match. Then they're going to apply the clear coat, and the tech may let air dry, force dry, heat gun, or in the booth, depending on the situation. But take that into account. You know, there is time involved here. In between each layer of the base coat they're spraying down, there's time to flash. They have to go through the same process as they would if they were painting the panel, so the paint reacts the same way. Also, let's talk about what it takes to make a sprayable material. So the primer sealer will require a reducer and a hardener to make it sprayable. The base coat requires a color and reducer to make it sprayable. The same thing with the mid coat. And the clear coat requires a clear, a reducer, and an activator or hardener, however your company describes that, to make a sprayable material. So it's not just clear coat. To create a sprayable clear coat takes multiple products. Always keep that in mind. So creating a test spray out panel for a three-stage paint has a few more steps involved. Same as the other, you may apply a primer sealer before applying the base coat. We're going to use the same steps in applying the base coat. We're going to apply the mid coat using some of the same steps of the base coat and varying the layers. Apply a clear coat, and then allow it to dry by the same means. In addition, the products require even more sprayable material here, right? That mid coat will require that to be reduced too. The reason base coats and other sprayable materials, other materials to become sprayable require reducers is because it allows it to become a thinner material and to be atomized into the gun as it's sprayed out in little bitty particles that lays on the surface of whatever you're top coating. So that is a very important part of this. So once the technician has determined the best mix and the number of layer applications required to achieve a color match, the materials used for tinting and the test spray out card are separate from the paint setup bid with the standard refinish operations. I can't say that enough. This is outside of what you bid in the book times. So think about it that way. This is another non-book application over the judgment time. So refinishing and how it is vital to vehicle safety. Let's start with corrosion protection. Corrosion protection is something that I think everybody and every estimator has bid. And unless you're, I don't know if anybody probably hasn't seen rust or knows what rust is. So that's what we're trying to prevent on steel. We're trying to prevent that rust. And we're trying to prevent any kind of deterioration of the metal for other metals that I'm going to show you here in a few minutes, the different type of metals. So let's start with some science. So I got this definition from the Collision Industry Conference Wiki for general automotive terms for the collision industry. And you can go to the CIC website, and there is a general definition that is accepted by the industry, and that includes insurance companies, shops, and other vendors and players in the industry. So corrosion is defined there as a chemical reaction of oxygen and moisture or corrosive materials on a metal surface, usually referred to as rusting or oxidation. Since we have many different types of metals used in vehicle construction today, it helps to understand how metal corrodes when we're estimating. This is a galvanic series of metals graphic and is a representation of the hierarchy of metals and how they corrode. The higher the metal is on the galvanic series of metals, the anode provides the protection for the lower metal in the series, the cathode. So the way to look at this is this way. Magnesium comes in contact with zinc. Zinc will corrode magnesium, not that way. Aluminum will corrode zinc. And here's where it really comes into our world. Steel will corrode aluminum. For instance, a rubber washer that is carbon-based will corrode aluminum. Also, we have several cars now on the road that has been for years. There's a Cadillac that has strut towers that are aluminum, but then we'll have steel aprons and apron rails. So it's very important as an estimator to understand what products are required. So start by going to the vehicle-specific OEM repair recommendations and find out what is required in order to create that barrier again between the aluminum and steel so they don't corrode. Because if the steel corrodes that aluminum strut tower, can you imagine what would happen if that car got in another accident? Or even in that situation, that strut tower could collapse due to the weight of the suspension being loaded when it's being driven, and the car just fall apart at that point. So it's very important when we're estimating to realize what needs to happen down the line. So you don't have to become a scientist to understand this stuff. But understanding some of that knowledge is really key to building up your skill set as an estimator. This type of information is a guide to the next step. You need to recognize the type of substrate requiring the repair, research the proper repair procedure, and bid the appropriate corrosion protection material. And let me make this clear. The time to apply corrosion protection is a judgment time item, and the amount of material cost is no different than any other product, so bid accordingly. You know, not all corrosion protection is in a spray can. It could be rolled on. It can be sprayed on with a spray can or a gun. It may be used by a wand. There are many different types. That's why it's important to understand the substrate and the reason. So the substrate being aluminum to steel, the reason you got to have a specific kind of corrosion protection for that area is because steel corrodes aluminum. That is the simple scientific fact. But you need to know that to explain that. And let me just add this in, guys. That information you have, when you understand that, you can use that when you're talking to people and selling the job. If somebody has damage to that area of their vehicle and it's aluminum with steel, explain to the customer how that's different and how you're going to take special care in your shop to do that. It will set you apart from your competitors. So refinishing, believe it or not, can affect the ADAS components. So the first thing we always want to do in this day and age is research OEM vehicle-specific repair information. I know we have general position statements, but they are what they are described as, general. Vehicle-specific is very important because it speaks to the model, the make, model, and year of the vehicle and how the OEM, the creator of the product, states to repair it correctly. Also, the three big estimating database providers do not decode all of the VIN. Some of them only decode up to 10 digits of the VIN. This is one of the reasons you don't get all the options and you have to have other choices in there. On the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration website, and you can just put in NHTSA VIN decoder in Google or Yahoo, and this will pop up, but I've actually put the website in the middle of the screen. You get this web page and you can put this in. And the ASA, I actually got this from the Automotive Service Association. shares that you can actually find what exactly safety systems are in the vehicle. So above and beyond that VIN search, it may help you to identify what ADAS components are on the vehicle. If you'll remember, excuse me, in the last webinar, I showed you the 2018 Buick Regal with the active hood technology. It really doesn't look a lot different from other model years, but that technology has a lot to do with the bumper cover and potentially how it's refinished or not. You need to look at the specific OEM information for that car and recognize that. And by putting the VIN number into a decoder like this, it can help you more quickly identify if cars have things like that. The national, I'm sorry, I lost my spot, everybody. The repair and refinish of a bumper cover is currently the most common example of how refinishing can affect the ADAS systems. Now, I keep talking about vehicle-specific information, but I would think that a lot of people are aware that the OEMs have position statements available that address the repairing and refinishing of bumper covers in the area of ADAS systems. You know, very specifically, those Doppler radars for the blind spot detection. Some of the manufacturers say you cannot repair in this general area, and they can only have so much paint applied to this area. So things to consider: always look at the OEM specific repair information. What is the paint coat thicknesses that is recommended? The mil gauge. Does your shop have the ability to measure the mil gauge on all types of panels? If not, you may want to look at having that, because you need that information. That's documentation. Let me add this: when you use that mil gauge to see how many mils is on that car, take a picture of it when you do it. Document it and put it in the file. Also, I would add, don't assume that a car straight from the manufacturer, straight from the factory, hasn't been repainted once or twice. I can remember throughout my career of repairing automobiles that sometimes we would get cars that are brand new to repair and they had already been painted 3 times in some areas, because stuff happens in the factory. Somebody's moving it out in the parking lot and they hit a cone, they back into something. And these manufacturing facilities have actually collision repair facilities within them that repair this type of damage. I want everybody to commit this to memory: documentation equals evidence. Think of everything you do as evidence. Each shop is presenting damages on behalf of the customer, as well as preserving the evidence of the repair processes for the shop. Use this as motivation. If you can't prove it, then it might as well never happened. That's just the fact of how it is. If you went into a court case today, whether it's small claims or whatever, if you don't have proof of it, can they accept it? More than likely not. So you need to create your evidence. Also, get out of the mindset that documentation is just because a bill payer has asked for it or requires it. The documentation requested by a bill payer should already exist in the shop's repair file. You should just be giving them some of the repair file they asked for. Documenting like this is just a good business practice. And realize that there is power in the knowledge of rock solid documentation provides. This provides a moment in time of everything that was done to that vehicle. No one is going to be able to remember what was done and how it was done. And conjecture and assuming is not proving it. Go back to the first bullet point. If you can't prove it, then it might as well never happen. So every paint manufacturer provides procedures for their products. Every estimator should have access to and understand how to apply this information to the repair. Vehicles are constructed with so many types of material substrates, and finding their way to the exterior of the vehicle more often, and they require top coating. For instance, carbon fiber, the majority of carbon fiber parts are painted on automobiles. And for some of the same reasons the steel parts are, to protect the substrate and to also increase the repairability of that part. Also, it is not feasible for an estimator to know all the paint procedures. Rather, they must learn the skill set of recognizing when to research, and when to apply the information. A lot of what I'm talking about is understanding where the forks are in the road of your process and then how to make a decision. And let me say this, everybody, stop using cookie cutter times. I know as human beings, we just want you to tell us what we need to put on the page. What does that cost? How much is this? But a lot of these things are just not that simple. They must be determined on merit. So each non-published book time should be determined on its own merit, but with education. Don't guess or assume. Training is key to evolving with a rapid changing car and repair techniques. Estimators, blueprinters, customer service reps, managers, and owners must receive training to understand all these changes. Technician training is only a portion of the training required to have a successful shop. If the shop owner does not understand the changes, they cannot hold the managers accountable for those changes. If the managers don't understand the changes, then they cannot hold the production staff accountable to the changes. And if the production staff does not understand the changes in the car, the money is never recovered, the shop is less profitable, and possibly unacceptable. So you need to train your estimators to understand the technical application of refinish materials. They do not have to learn the how, but they must understand the why. They also need to recognize when to research and when to ask questions of the technician, manager, and other resources. So I don't want to create a situation where your estimators are bugging your technicians because your technicians get mad. I'm sure some of you are probably thinking that right now. However, technicians do like it when you ask them pertinent questions to what they're doing. If it's going to save them time down the road, especially someone that's on commission, they are happy the estimators are asking their questions. We actually see this over and over again through our training, that when the estimating staff starts becoming more aware of why they're doing things and then applying the research and asking the technician about it, the technicians, how they view and feel about the estimators, that greatly changes, especially when they had a negative feeling about it. And I can relate to that. So there is an opportunity in your shop for just-in-time training anytime. You have a laboratory in the back for your estimators. I want everybody to start thinking about that manages or owns a shop. How can I use this laboratory in the back to help my estimators to understand? And here's just an example. So have the estimator or take the opportunity at this time, if there's, say the refinish technician is going to tint paint, create a situation where an estimator can go review that entire process. And let's make it important that they're not disturbed, because you really want them to learn. And another area to do that is when they're going to have to do a spray out card for 3-stage. And I recommend 3-stage because if they see how a 3-stage card is made, they're going to inherently understand how a 2-stage card is made. But by doing this, this does two things. I want you to have them do this. I want you to have them take pictures, and I want you to have them take notes. Then I want them to bring the notes back with the pictures and create their own job aid, Word document or whatever you have. And they're going to use this in the future. And this is great for you because it confirms to you that they paid attention. So now you know they learned something from that training. And there is actually something that is of value when you have them do that. Secondly, the estimator now has a job aid to follow when they can't remember. They're not asking the technician, they're not asking somebody else, right? They've created their own job aid. And also this creates a job aid to show the customer. So if the customer comes in and has a pearl finish or a 3-stage finish, the estimator could use that as a prop to show them how this is done and what needs to go in to do this. Again, this is another selling technique that you can use. So continuing education is important. Just-in-time training is great to learn how to do something in the moment or to apply an idea to what you're doing. But it's also important that you seek certified training throughout the year, every year, as continuing education. And this is a confirmation of the comprehension of a skill or a skill set. Accountable Estimating has on-demand courses and courses approved for elective credits through the Automotive Management Institute. The Automotive Management Institute has a lot of soft skills training that teach a lot of leadership and other training also. They also are the provider for FCA America now. Also, our live training that we do virtually in shops now will soon be available for credit on AMI as well. So a little something for you guys. To learn more about how our products can help you, to talk to us, I put together a landing page for you, and it's theaccountableestimating.com/RDA. We have some hot deals on there for you. We have discounts on everything for an RDA member. Please give me a call the phone number, or send me an email, or click the links and book a time to talk, and we would be happy to talk to you on how we can help you implement such things as what I've been talking about in estimating and help your processes all together. And with that being said, Melissa, that's all I have. So I'll open it up and ask, what questions does everybody have?